Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into what is hands down one of the darkest, most politically charged chapters in the entire Bible, Judges chapter 9. Now, normally when we read the book of Judges, the Israelites are up against some terrifying foreign enemy, right? Well, not here. This time, the threat is entirely an inside job. It's coming right from within the covenant community itself. We're going to unpack the story of Gideon's son, Abimelech, a guy who literally slaughters his own brothers, leverages his family ties for political power, and crowns himself king in Shechem. And in response to this horrific power grab, Jotham, the youngest and only surviving brother, climbs a mountain to deliver a biting, prophetic parable. It's basically a masterclass in the anatomy of false, toxic kingship. Let's kick things off with a really chilling number, 70. Abimelech goes to his mother's relatives in Shechem and completely manipulates them. He hands them a false political choice, saying, "Hey, remember, I'm your bone and your flesh." Because of those family ties and totally ignoring his actual character, he secures 70 pieces of silver from a pagan temple. And what does he do with this blood money? He hires a gang of scoundrels and slaughters his 70 half-brothers on a single stone. Only Jotham manages to escape. So right out of the gate, human life becomes the horrific price tag for this illegitimate throne.
Here is our roadmap for today. We'll cover 1. The dark era of Judges, 2. Jotham's parable of the trees, 3. The bramble's shadow, 4. The curse and mutual destruction, 5. Abimelech versus Christ, and finally, 6. Principles for Christian leadership.
Let's start with part 1. The dark era of Judges, a cycle broken from within.
Okay, so before Israel had a monarchy, they had this whole cycle of judges. You know the drill. The Israelites fall into idolatry, a foreign enemy oppresses them, they cry out to God, and God graciously raises up a judge to save them. But chapter 9 throws a massive wrench into that pattern. Look at this. There is no foreign oppressor, there's no cry to God, and God certainly does not appoint Abimelech. The corruption had gotten so bad that an Israelite was now acting exactly like a Canaanite oppressor against his own family. It proves a really profound point. When God's people reject his rule, tyranny breeds right on the inside.
To really understand Abimelech, you have to look at his dad, Gideon. Back in Judges 8, the Israelites literally asked Gideon to start a royal dynasty. Gideon said all the right things, verbally rejecting it, saying the Lord will rule over you. Great, right? Except he hypocritically lived exactly like a king. He hoarded gold, took a bunch of wives, fathered 70 sons, and, most tellingly, named his son with a Shechemite concubine, Abimelech. And do you know what that name translates to? My father is king. Gideon's spoken theology totally clashed with his lived reality, and his son just turned those royal expectations into violent ambition.
Now check out the massive theological irony happening in the background here. The leaders of Shechem funded Abimelech's rise using silver from the temple of Baal-berith. Baal-berith literally means Lord of the Covenant. Do you see the absolute tragedy in that? Israel's true Lord of the Covenant was Yahweh, but the people of Shechem took money from a false covenant to fund a false king and ended up breaking their true covenant with God. It just goes to show that false worship inevitably produces corrupt politics.
Moving right along to part 2, Jotham's parable of the trees, the satire of the bramble king.
So Jotham, the only surviving brother, stands on Mount Gerizim and delivers this brilliant, biting political satire. It's actually the Bible's first major parable where non-human things speak. In the story, the trees go looking for a king. They ask the olive, the fig, and the vine. Now, all three of these are incredibly valuable, providing oil, food, and wine, and all three flat out reject the offer of political power. Why? Because they refuse to abandon their God-given outward-facing service just to wave their branches and rule over others. They already have purpose. They don't need a fancy title to validate their existence.
And that brings us to this perfect visual contrast. After the fruitful trees say no, the assembly lowers their standards all the way into the dirt, literally. They ask the bramble, a useless, low-to-the-ground weed. And the bramble? It immediately snatches up the crown. Why? Because it has no real fruit to offer anyway. This exposes a really dangerous truth about leadership. Sometimes, the people who most desperately crave power are the exact ones who have the least actual value to offer the community.
That leads us to part 3, the bramble shadow, false promises and real threats.
Listen to how completely absurd this is. The bramble accepts the crown and tells the massive, towering trees to come take refuge in its shade. A low, prickly weed physically cannot provide shade for a massive cedar. It is promising a level of protection it is entirely incapable of giving. But then it drops a very real threat. If not, let fire come out. Sure, the bramble can't give shade, but you know what dry thorn bushes are great for? Starting wildfires? The threat is crystal clear. Submit completely or be destroyed. False leadership almost always relies on coercion and fear.
On to part 4, the curse in mutual destruction, a prophecy fulfills in fire.
You see, Jotham's parable wasn't just a clever story, it was a covenant lawsuit. He challenged Shechem, basically asking, did you act with truth and integrity when you made this guy king? The answer was obviously no, and the historical fulfillment of his curse was swift. After just 3 years, God sends a dividing spirit between them. Abimelech literally burns down the stronghold of Shechem, and shortly after that, a woman drops a heavy millstone from a wall, crushing Abimelech's skull. An alliance built on bloodshed ended in bloodshed. The judgment fit the crime perfectly.
Let's look at part 5, Abimelech versus Christ, the false king and the true king.
If anything, this horrific narrative sets up a deep longing for the right kind of king. This contrast is absolutely striking. It shows how Christ's true, sacrificial kingship turns Abimelech's violent leadership completely upside down. Think about it. Abimelech climbs over the corpses of his own family to seize a throne he was never appointed to. Jesus Christ steps down from heaven and dies for his brothers. Abimelech demands the people bow to him or face the fire of his wrath. Jesus Christ bows down to serve his people and takes the fire of God's wrath upon himself on the cross.
When you break it down like this, it is incredibly clear that Israel didn't just need any king, they desperately needed a righteous king. Abimelech's reign was sourced purely in human ambition, offered fake shade, and lasted a miserable 3 years. Christ's kingdom, on the other hand, is sourced in divine love. He actually provides the true refuge that he promises, and his reign is eternal. The bramble takes life to gain power. The true king gives his life to empower his people.
Finally, let's wrap up with part 6, Principles for Christian Leadership, recognizing the brambles today.
Let's bring this ancient story right into the present day because human nature really hasn't changed. We need to be aware of these toxic, bramble-like leadership traits in our communities. Just like Shechem, when we pick leaders based on family ties, wealth, or manipulation, rather than godly character and a track record of real fruitfulness, we are literally planting thorns. Brambles care way more about titles than actually serving anyone. And the second they are questioned, out comes the fire of intimidation. Because again, those who most desperately crave power are often the least qualified to hold it, and they'll eventually destroy the very community they claim to protect.
I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought to challenge how we view our own ambitions and the leaders we choose to follow. Are you like the olive, the fig, and the vine, deeply rooted in God, producing sweet fruit, and serving those around you regardless of who gets the credit? Or are you a bit more like the bramble, grasping for titles, demanding loyalty, and ready to burn down anyone who gets in your way? True leadership in God's kingdom is never about climbing to the top just to cast a shadow. It's about staying rooted in service to bear real fruit.